What is osteoporosis and exercise guidelines? Hi, I'm Hayley from Parallel Coaching, and in today's video, we're going to explore the condition that is osteoporosis. We're going to understand what that is as a definition, but also how you can offer exercise guidance to those clients that do have osteoporosis and what your limitations are within that. So as we dive into today's content, I want to let you know that there are 3 mock questions that you can test your knowledge on based on today's content, which is a great way of recapping and making sure that everything we've spoken about is sticking. Now, before I go any further, also make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you get notifications of all future videos that we do, just like this one. Now, let's first of all find out some of the effects of aging, because osteoporosis is a condition that is linked to those that are aging. So the older we get, the more some of our systems in our body start to deteriorate and start to reduce in capacity. And our bone density is one of those, which is osteoporosis. But also there is an increased stiffness in our joints. And this increased stiffness is because we actually have less hydration in our tendons and our ligaments, and they become less pliable, less elastic, and a lot more collagen based. And this means that they feel stiffer in our joints. It might take us a bit longer to get going in exercise, and usually why people require a longer warm up as we get older. Then there's also a reduction in our muscle fibre number and size. Now, this is called sarcopenia. And if you want to know more about sarcopenia, click the link that is with this video and it will take you to our next YouTube video whereby I talk all about sarcopenia in detail. Then it's also more likely to have long-term conditions as we get older. So as we get older, our bodies actually start to deteriorate. They get to the point whereby we're not at our peak anatomy and physiology. And as a result, we actually get more long-term conditions start to appear, whether that's obesity, hypertension, cancer, back pain, fibromyalgia, Parkinson's, all of these things, dementia, all of these things build up over time and actually become more likely as we get older. And it's important to understand some of these changes that happen to our body as part of the aging process. Now, one of those long-term conditions that we could have is osteoarthritis, and this is the reduced cushioning in joints. So that as the joints basically deteriorate over time and they start wearing down on each other, you end up with bone and bone meeting rather than having the synovial fluid cushioning. And as a result, they sort of grind a little bit more. They could create bony spurs and a locking effect in that joint. And as a result, it's restriction and pain. And that's osteoarthritis. Now, there's also osteoporosis, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And this is about the reduced bone density in the bone itself. So rather than the joints, it's the bone. And we're talking about porous nature, so it's about bone density. Now, these are some of the common effects of aging. There are many more as well, but it's just so that you understand some of the impacts that happen on our body. It's not just our bones. It's not just our muscles. There's lots of different changes that happen across our whole system as we age. Now, let's explore what osteoporosis is. Now, osteoporosis is defined as a reduced density of bone mass that makes the skeletal system more fragile and more prone to fracture. Now, the most common fracture sites, there's 3 most common fracture sites. You have the hip, the spine, and the wrist. Now, the reason for this is not just because these are areas that are often exposed to high amounts of impact over the years, especially our spine and our hips, but also because if we were to take a fall, these are the areas that take the brunt of it. So just imagine now you trip over something and you put your hands out in front of you, your wrists are going to take the brunt of that impact. And as a result of taking the brunt of that impact, they're more likely to fracture if they're already fragile and lesser in density. Or, for example, you might fall, and instead of falling forwards, you fall to the side, in which case you land on the hip or the very top of the femur, so the neck of the femur. And as a result, those areas become likely to fracture. Now, the spine is likely to fracture because it's taking the whole body weight. And you've got these little vertebrae all stacked up. And the fractures don't just occur sort of side to side. They also compress inwards. And that can also be very painful. Now, these little hairline fractures are still really important to bear in mind. And they often come as a result of this reduced bone mass density and alongside any specific impactful work that's happened, like a fall or like any unplanned impact. Now, as we're understanding more about osteoporosis, we need to know what the bone is made up of. And it's actually made up mostly of collagen, but also of calcium. Now, as we get older, some of these minerals get leached out of the system. And whereas a healthy bone has just small little dots in the bone, these little dots are like little spaces, little tiny porous network. And I want you to imagine like honeycomb or a crunchy chocolate bar. Imagine this crunchy chocolate bar. It's pretty firm, isn't it? So if you put the crunchy chocolate bar down and you put a little bit of weight on it, it can take it, it can handle it, just like a normal healthy bone can. But someone with osteoporosis, these gaps inside the bone get bigger where some of the minerals get leached away. And as these minerals get leached away and the gaps get bigger, it becomes more fragile and more porous, which means that it's more like an aero than it is a crunchy bar. And that's actually much more fragile. So if you were to put something heavy on top of an aero, it crumbles, doesn't it? Or when you go to break it, it doesn't break evenly and it makes a bit of a mess. That's basically, not that I'm just an expert on chocolate, but with osteoporosis, you can see how it compromises the structure and the stability of the bone mass itself. This is really important to understand how it actually makes fractures much more likely. Now, if you want to work with somebody that has osteoporosis, then you will need to be qualified to work with them. So this YouTube video gives you some good guidance on what it is and the types of things you can and can't do with them. But actually what is more important is that you're adequately qualified to work with them. And like I say, as people get older, they don't just get one condition, they get multiple conditions. And in having these multiple conditions, you need to be able to deal with all eventualities and combinations of conditions. So to do that, you need either the older exercise referral qualification, which will allow you to work with long-term conditions, or the new version, which is the level 3 diploma in supporting clients with long-term conditions. And it outlines 27 different conditions and also talks about the aging process. So if you want to find out more about that, that is something that we offer at Parallel Coaching, and I'll pop a link that is alongside this video so you can find out exactly how it will help you work with these types of clients. Now, if you are able to go and work with them, here's a recap of the type of things you can do and what those exercise guidelines are. So first of all, the first exercise guidelines are to stay within the normal healthy guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate activity across the span of a week. And that doesn't have to be rigorous kind of cardiovascular exercise. It can also be unstructured, neat. It can be going for a walk. It could be vigorous cleaning around the house, gardening. It's about 150 minutes of moderate activity. But there's also a guideline to make sure that they do 2 or more resistance training sessions. And this is to help have more weight bearing on the bones and the muscles. Now, if you have more weight bearing on the bones, it will actually mean that it responds to that stimulus by increasing bone mass density, or at least maintaining it. We also want to make sure we stimulate the muscles, because that's going to help us from having a fall and a fracture in the first place. And that's part of the next part of the guidelines, is to make sure we focus on fall prevention. The more we focus on activating the glutes, activating the core, and making sure that our clients have good agility, balance, and coordination, we can improve their function for daily living, but we can also mean that we help prevent the likelihood of a fall later on. But it's important that we do this responsibly. The last thing we want to do is give our clients a really tricky balance exercise and actually end up giving them a fall on that session, because that defies the entire logic for why we wanted them to exercise in the first place. So we want to make sure it's done in a safe and a logically progressed manner. We also want to avoid exercises that have excessive flexion and extension of the spine, and that's because those vertebrae are more likely to have compressed fractures when they're forced into different positions. We also want to avoid any sudden changes of direction, any things that are going to be very tricky with coordination or involve lots of twisting. And these are exercises that are prone for falls, but also prone for somebody like stepping over themselves, having impact, falling over, getting confused about direction, jolting in direction, having more impact on those joints and muscles and bones. Then finally, what we don't want to do is have excessive amounts of high impact. This would be jumping, not just big depth jumps and box jumps, but I mean, even the small jumps, skipping, hopping, those types of things can be quite significant amounts of impact, which can impact the likelihood of a fracture in any of the bones of the body. And that basically brings up to all of the different things you need to know about exercise guidelines for osteoporosis. It's about being cautious, but also applying a good amount of challenge so that that person can adhere to the stimulus and they can make physiological adaptations to actually make the bones stronger, or at least maintain the density that it has. Now that you understand everything about osteoporosis and how to work with them, if you want to find out more about our supporting clients with long-term conditions qualification, all you need to do is click the link that is with this video. Outside of that, make sure that you take a look at the 3 mock questions that are alongside today's training so that you can test your knowledge on everything we've discussed. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you on the next video. Take care.